So I thought I'd make this video to try and improve my own vocabulary of describing sounds, as well as make it clearer for anyone who watches my videos exactly what I'm on about when I'm describing sounds that I'm hearing here in the room. I'll start with the more straightforward and widely accepted terms and then move to the more subjective and ambiguous ones. I'll try and provide some recorded examples along the way, but these are just to provide a little context. You know, as I said before, there's no substitute really for being in the room, but I will do my best. Bright and dark, and also clear and dull, are pretty well established like visual descriptions for how much treble is in a sound. It's quite a broad description, but in general, a clear bright sound has more treble, and a dull dark sound would have less treble. Temperature, cold and warm could be used for this as well. So warm being probably the most complimentary way. You can simply say there's just not an overabundance of high frequencies in the sound. Low end levels of bass frequencies are often described as physical size. So a big fat low end is just a simple way of saying that there's a lot of bass frequencies being heard. If there's a lack of low frequencies, then it'd often be described as something like small or thin. Mid-frequency levels are most often described by the way that they look on a graphic equalizer. So you might get a mid-scoop, meaning the mid-frequencies are reduced. A mid-hump would mean the mid-frequencies are increased. You could get a mid-spike as well. So for instance, you could say a Celestion V30 speaker has a pleasant high mid-spike. You can also get low mid-spikes. You can also get holes in the mid-frequency where one particular frequency is reduced. If something sounds like it has generally very few frequency spikes, then you might call it smooth or round sounding. The only other word that comes to mind for me with mid-frequencies is the term body. You know, just like our bodies make up the core of our existence, I guess. You know, it's not our clothes or the room around us or anything. You know, it's our body which is at the core. It's kind of like that with guitar sounds and mid-frequencies. You know, mid-frequencies make up the core of the guitar sound. So I think body is a pretty decent term for a broad range of mid-frequencies. Airiness normally means those natural extended high frequencies where you're going past the more general treble frequencies and you're going higher. So those kind of frequencies are what I associate with kind of airiness, and when I use that term, especially with clean sounds. With overdriven sounds, I'd more be tempted to use the term sizzle. It's a similar frequency but just has a different sound when you incorporate an overdrive. On amps, it's normally controlled by a bright switch or a presence control. Open sounding, as opposed to closed and muted sounding, are other terms I would use to describe the amount of those extended high frequencies. So far, I've only been going through terms that mostly concern EQ. The next biggest thing is to understand the terms that people use when they're trying to describe the dynamics of a sound. So punch is one of the most common ones that I hear. And while you could associate it with low frequencies and high frequencies, I most often hear it associated with mid frequencies. And in particular, those aggressive mid frequencies that feel like they kind of hit you in the chest. Anyone who's been in the same room as a cranked Marshall style amp with a large closed back cab knows that kind of feeling. It's a very aggressive attack that literally almost feels like it's punching you in the chest. You know, it's quite an exhilarating way to experience sound that a lot of rock players seek. opposite of punch, which is, a fast attack, are probably words like polite and laid back, detailed sounding maybe. And it's those sorts of words that I find useful when you're trying to describe a slower, more gentle attack to the sound. And it's that polite, more detailed sound that I look for if I'm playing a lot of extended chords, maybe chord melody jazz and stuff like that, where I want to hear all the detail in the sound, all the notes in the chords, rather than just an attacking clump of mids. Ice pick is a fast attack in the high end. I find it's a good way of describing those more unpleasant high frequencies that almost, jump out and poke you in the eyes. It's that sort of thing. The pickups in my Fender Jaguar are quite attacking sounding. And if I use the bridge pickup into a clean amp with a bright switch on or the presence too high, I really find I do get a lot of that kind of ice pick sound coming through. Tight and loose are really good terms to use to describe dynamics. Maybe in the mid-range, but most often in the lower frequencies. So if something's got a tight low end, it's most often describing a fast attack and release of the bass frequencies. Whereas a loose low end would have a slow attack and release of those bass frequencies. Thump and boom could be used in a similar way to the terms tight and loose as well. So if you think some of the terms I've been using so far are a little subjective, let's get into some of the ones I think are really ambiguous. And remember, feel free to disagree with me on my descriptions of these. These are just my takes on them and how I understand them. Let me know in the comments what they mean to you. And here's some of the more debatable and unusual terms in guitar tone talk. Glassy, to me, is a fairly clean sound, maybe represented by the clean, transparent appearance of glass. It has a bright attack to the notes, probably represented by the initial ping when you hit a glass, but there's still some ring and sustain to other frequencies. I feel like a Strat into a clean Fender amp set with a bit of a mid scoop is a pretty good example of this sort of sound, but it's certainly not specific to that setup. Chime. Sorry, I don't have a set of chimes to demonstrate this one with, but this one's largely associated with the high-end response of a Vox AC30 amp, where it's bright and clear sounding, but it's kind of compressed and rings in a pleasing way. For me, there's a bit of a crossover with the term jangle as well. When you think of a set of like wind chimes or something like that, they do have a kind of jangly nature, I guess. So for me, those two terms are pretty similar. Woody is more about mid-range frequencies for me. I would say a natural mid-range resonance that has a fairly fast release to the sound. I hear it more in semi-hollow and fully hollow body guitars. Spongy, for me, is a natural kind of subtle compression that just softens attack. So if I clap my bare hands, there's a hard attack to that sound. If I do the same thing with the sponge there, the attack is softened. And it's a similar thing with your guitar signal. It's just sort of dampening it a little bit, or you could think of it in different terms. You could think of it as soaking up some of the volume that you're giving it. You know, it doesn't give you everything. The sponginess of a valve amp, for instance, soaks up some of the volume that you're giving it. And that's where I hear this term used a lot as well, in the power section of a valve amp, where people are talking about the sag of a valve rectifier or something like that, you know, and so it has a spongy response. Basically, when you play hard, it soaks up some of the energy. Yeah, it's something that I find I can feel a bit more than hear sometimes. You kind of feel it when you're playing certain amplifiers. And squishy and squashy are terms that are similar, that can describe a more extreme compression. But it's kind of the same thing, squishy, squashy, spongy, you know, similar stuff. Something to keep in mind that you probably already realised is that you can use a complementary term, or you can use a derogatory term to describe the exact same sound. So, for example, you could describe an amp as sounding really nice and open sounding, or you can describe it as sounding harsh and with ice pick frequencies. You know, does that guitar sound really nice and woody, or does it just lack sustain? Or does the other guitar have really nice sustain, or does it just lack dynamics and sound honky, you know? To me, a lot of those terms are just different ways of describing the same thing to me. So when you read forum posts, reviews, marketing talk, it's probably a good idea to bear that in mind. And what I'm going to really try and do is just to make sure I never get so lazy that I just, you know, throw out buzzwords, and that I make sure I always listen to the sound as much as I can and take the time to find the right words to describe the sound to you guys. But it's probably a good idea to be on the lookout a little bit for when you get the sense that someone might be running out of vocabulary and just starting to throw out buzzwords like that. I certainly, you know, think I hear it in some of the marketing that I come across with guitar tone and stuff like that. But that's the approach I'm going to take anyway. And let me know down in the comments, you know, the most ridiculous term you've come across for describing guitar tone.